Okay. Let's come to Honorable Ndindi Nyoro. One is, of course, subject to some bills that will be debated in Parliament. But has the Hustler Fund, in your view, lived the purpose that it was formed for?
The Hustler Fund is serving the reason why it was formed. And I want to disagree, and especially on the quantum. We went around the country, and I was almost in all the meetings. The kind of category of Kenyans that we are trying to include in the credit system are not the people who are or would borrow the kind of quantum professor would think about. A normal mama boga, a normal hustler would actually want a stock of 1,000 a day. Previously, they would go into a Shylock, they borrow, and of course they pay exorbitantly. Currently, we have been able to disburse 36.5 billion Kenya shillings in the Hustler Fund, or through the Hustler Fund. 17 million Kenyans have already borrowed, 7.5 million repeatedly. It is serving its purpose, and that is why we continue to capitalize it. From 12 billion, in this current budget, we have added 10 billion. But allow me holistically, Ayub, to also say that I am very glad, and I want to say that I am very happy that we are in the position that we are in, even in this studio. Because even in Kiharu sometimes I tell my staff that we go into a meeting, we call, where I don't accept anything good that they say, because I want to handle the heavy stuff.
Okay.
So the kind of criticisms you are getting from Kenyans, the kind of opinions you are getting from Kenyans, even experts,
all right,
on my side, I think it is a good thing. But the legitimacy of any regime, legitimacy of government, is never hedged on the opinions of the current situation. It is never also hedged on the policies. It is hedged on deliverables. What ultimately people remember, what ultimately works for a regime or a government, is not just what I come and say here on TV.
Right.
It is exactly what we are doing. And allow me just a minute to highlight just a few.
All right.
Ayub, because we can talk about where we need to improve, which is acceptable, and I am of the opinion that we should always listen to Kenyans so that we improve. But it's also important that you also report some of the deliverables. As we sit here in the studio, and I'm just highlighting some of the things we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. We have given Kenyans a very good platform in terms of Hustler Fund. Within that 1 year, we have given fertilizer. Okay. We have allocated 630 billion Kenya shillings into education. This current year, we have already advertised for hiring of 8,000 fresh graduates to be given internship opportunities by government with a salary of 25,000 every month. This 1 year, we have hired 56,000 teachers, something that is unprecedented. This same year, we have been able to recalibrate tertiary education, and 45,000 Kenyans will be reporting to various universities. Some actually have already reported without paying a single cent, because the government is doing that.
Thank you.
And as I wind up,
yes,
if that is that question directed to me?
Yes, please. Yeah, to you, of course. Just a follow-up on, because you have mentioned a very critical point before I move to Ndindi Nyoro.
Okay.
And this was largely a premise that the government hinged its pledge on. For example, as the chair of the National Assembly's Budget and Appropriations Committee, talking about the fertilizer you have mentioned, what has reached the farmers in terms of quantification?
What has reached the farmer, Ayub, we have been able to give close to 4 million bags, and I talked about the statistics of outcome. But also, it is important for Kenyans to know that we have a different approach, which we are calling value chain. We are tracking a shilling in terms of input up to the output, across. Even in education, the money we are putting into basic education, we are tracing it by more investment into tertiary. We are going to internship. If you look, it is a chain. Okay. And even at the output level, we are delivering jobs across digital jobs, through housing, and through industry, through the 47 aggregation centers. But also, Ayub, allow me to say this, because we've been talking about inflation, and we've been talking about fuel. It is important for us to separate these two issues. Right. That fuel is two-sided. One, there is fuel for consumption, but also on the other side, there is fuel as a factor of production. That is a factor in the production arena. The fuel in the production arena, the amount of VAT you put into that fuel is inconsequential, because as a producer, as an industry, you still have a right to claim back the VAT. whether it is 8%,
right,
whether it is 16%.
Okay.
And that is why we never saw monumental changes when we had this regime.
Thank you.
And lastly,
okay, just hang on, because point. This is a pertinent point, and before we move on, and it's important we keep time. When you talk about the question of now focusing on production to address generally the cost of living and the economy at large, the Russian President Vladimir Putin mentioned during the St. Petersburg Africa Heads of State Summit that the Russian government had given Kenya 34,000 metric tons of fertilizer. And you are ending up selling the fertilizer to the farmers. If you have appreciated the high cost of crisis in the country, why sell to the farmers imported fertilizer that is largely free or grant from the Russian government?
You know, I would want you to go back and check the statistics in terms of the fertilizer that we have been able to deliver to our farmers vis-a-vis the grant. And you also have to choose between believing your own government and any other communique that you listen out there. But lastly, I was to put up this point. When you look at our GDP, we are concentrating in terms of baking the cake.
Okay.
GDP as a whole, because GDP ultimately is what becomes the wealth that we all share. We are doing everything to grow each segment of the GDP. GDP, and I will take a minute to highlight. We are looking at it in terms of, number one, what are we doing about private investment? Through our policies, both in the Finance Act and through the investment in the budget, you can clearly see what we are doing. In terms of spurring consumption, and especially by creation of jobs, creating more consumers. When you go to government, because all this as an addition is what creates the GDP.
Thank you.
You can be able to see what the government is doing in terms of government investment. But lastly, we are not just concentrating on baking the cake. We are cognizant of the fact that in the current situation, not all Kenyans are taking part in baking this cake because they don't have opportunities. And that is the reason why, through shared prosperity policy that we have, we are currently actually registering the vulnerable in our society, 70 years and above, the severely disabled, the orphans, unprecedented. We are registering all of them. Because as we bake the cake up here, we need also to take care of the vulnerable in our society as a way of shared prosperity.
Thank you. Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, focusing on the Hustler Fund and the universal health care